June 4th, 1942. 9 a.m. Berlin. The morning arrives in the Reich Chancellery with the mechanical precision that defines German military routine. Orderlies move quietly through marble corridors. Leather boots echo against polished stone. In the operations wing, senior staff officers gather for the daily intelligence briefing, a ritual that has become the heartbeat of Germany's war effort. Maps dominate the walls. The Eastern Front sprawls across most of them, marked with symbols representing divisions, supply lines, and objectives. North Africa occupies a smaller section. The Atlantic, with its convoy routes and submarine zones, claims another. The Pacific is present but peripheral, a theater belonging to an ally whose successes are assumed rather than scrutinized. Adolf Hitler enters precisely on schedule. His presence commands immediate stillness. Aides stand. Papers are organized. The briefing begins with the East, as it always does. Soviet positions. German advances, logistical challenges. The rhythm is familiar. Hitler listens, interrupts, questions. His focus remains where it has been for months, on the vast landscape stretching toward Moscow and beyond, where he believes Germany's fate will be decided. Then comes the secondary intelligence summary. A brief notation from the Pacific Theater. The Imperial Japanese Navy has engaged American carrier forces near an atoll called Midway, northwest of Hawaii. The report is preliminary. Details are sparse. Contact has been made. Aircraft have been committed. Losses are mentioned without specificity. The outcome remains undetermined. The language is careful, technical, stripped of emotion. It describes an operation in progress, not a conclusion. For most in the room, the update registers as routine. Japan has been dominant in the Pacific since December. Pearl Harbor shattered American naval strength. The Philippines fell. Singapore collapsed. The Dutch East Indies were overrun. Japanese carrier forces moved with apparent immunity, striking across thousands of miles of ocean. This engagement near Midway seems consistent with that pattern. Another demonstration of Japanese superiority, another confirmation that America remains reactive, defensive, diminished. But something is different this morning. The report does not describe victory. It does not claim decisive results. It mentions engagement without resolution, aircraft losses without totals, carrier movements without confirmation of damage. The tone is uncertain in a way that previous Pacific summaries have not been. For those trained to read between carefully chosen words, this absence of confidence is notable. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, reviews the same intelligence shortly after the briefing concludes. He returns to his office and rereads the Pacific summary twice. Keitel is a man of rigid discipline and unquestioning loyalty to Hitler. His role demands administrative precision rather than strategic innovation. He enforces orders, manages coordination, and maintains the structure through which Germany's vast military apparatus functions. The Eastern Front consumes most of his attention. Preparations for the summer offensive are underway. Operation Blue will drive toward the Caucasus, toward the oil fields that Germany desperately needs. The Pacific War is, in Keitel's understanding, Japan's responsibility. Germany has no operational role there, no forces to commit, no decisions to make. Yet even Keitel notices the deviation from established patterns. Japanese communications are usually swift, confident, definitive. This report is none of those things. It speaks of contact without conclusion, action without outcome. The language suggests complexity where simplicity had been expected. Keitel does not dismiss it, but neither does he dwell on it. He files the summary with other secondary intelligence and returns to the immediate demands of the Eastern Theater. Across the city, in the offices of the Naval High Command, the same report receives closer attention. German naval officers have studied carrier warfare with professional interest. The success of Japan's carrier doctrine has validated theories about naval aviation and mobile strike forces. The attack on Pearl Harbor demonstrated what concentrated carrier power could achieve against static defenses. Subsequent operations across the Pacific reinforced the belief that carriers had become the decisive instrument of naval warfare, replacing battleships as the primary means of projecting power at sea. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine arm, reads the Midway summary with particular focus. Dönitz is not directly involved in carrier operations. Germany possesses no fleet carriers, but he understands naval strategy at a systemic level. His submarine campaign in the Atlantic depends on assumptions about enemy capabilities, response times, and industrial capacity. The United States is central to those calculations. American shipbuilding determines how quickly convoy losses can be replaced. American naval strength determines how effectively those convoys can be protected. Any change in American naval capability affects the entire strategic balance. The Midway report suggests uncertainty about American carrier strength. That matters. If American carriers have been eliminated, then the Pacific War is effectively decided, and the United States will remain divided between oceans, unable to concentrate its full strength in either theater. If American carriers remain operational, then the opposite is true. The United States retains offensive capacity, and Japan's dominance is contested rather than absolute. Dönitz does not yet know which scenario applies. The intelligence is too incomplete, but he understands that the answer will shape the broader war. By midday, additional reports arrive through diplomatic channels and intercepted communications. They do not clarify the situation. Instead, they introduce new complications. One intercept references significant Japanese aircraft losses. Another mentions American carriers engaged in active counterstrikes. A third describes the battle as ongoing, with results still uncertain. These fragments do not form a coherent picture. They suggest chaos, intensity, and outcomes not yet determined. For German planners accustomed to receiving clear assessments from their Japanese allies, this ambiguity is troubling. Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff, begins requesting follow-up intelligence. Jodl is methodical, analytical, and less ideologically rigid than many in Hitler's inner circle. He understands war as a system of interconnected factors: logistics, intelligence, production, morale. He does not dismiss unfavorable information simply because it contradicts expectations. The Midway engagement concerns him because it represents a deviation from the predictable. Japan was expected to control the Pacific Initiative. American forces were expected to remain defensive, reactive, weakened. The reports arriving from Midway suggest something else. They suggest preparation, coordination, and effective resistance. Jodl reviews the intelligence with his senior planning staff. They discuss the implications carefully. If American carriers were positioned to intercept the Japanese operation, that implies intelligence success. The United States would have needed advanced knowledge of Japanese intentions, accurate enough to position forces in the right location at the right time. This is not the behavior of a disorganized or defeated enemy. It is the behavior of an enemy learning, adapting, improving. Jodl does not voice alarm, but his questions become more pointed. How many American carriers were involved? What was their operational readiness? Were they supported by land-based aircraft? How effective was their coordination? The answers he receives are incomplete. The battle is still unfolding. Japanese communications remain cautious. American intentions are unclear. What is clear is that the engagement has not produced the swift, decisive Japanese victory that previous Pacific operations delivered. That absence speaks louder than any preliminary report. As the afternoon progresses, the tone of internal briefings shifts subtly. The language becomes more guarded. The battle is now described as costly. American resistance is characterized as unexpectedly strong. Japanese objectives are described as contested rather than achieved. Still, no explicit admission of defeat appears. This restraint reflects both uncertainty and cultural practice. Japanese military communications are designed to preserve authority and confidence, especially with allies. German officers understand this. They also understand what is missing. The expected declaration of decisive success has not arrived. That silence is significant. Within Hitler's immediate circle, discussion remains limited. Hitler himself shows little outward reaction to the incomplete reports. He is known for focusing intensely on immediate priorities and dismissing unfavorable news until it becomes unavoidable. The Pacific theater lies far from his direct control and his immediate concern. The war he cares about is being fought in the East, where German armies are preparing to advance once more. The war he fears is being planned in Britain, where Allied bombing raids grow more frequent. The Pacific War is distant, abstract, and ultimately Japan's burden to carry. Yet even for Hitler, certain implications are inescapable. The United States entered the war in December 1941. Its industrial capacity is undeniable. Its geographical security is absolute. If American forces remain capable of offensive action, then the strategic timeline Germany depends upon is threatened. Germany's war plan has always assumed speed. Defeat the Soviet Union before American power can fully mobilize. Force Britain into exhaustion before American forces arrive in strength. Conclude the war in Europe before the United States can transform its industrial might into deployed military strength. That timeline depends on American weakness, division, and delay. Midway, even without full clarity, suggests that those assumptions may not hold. By early evening, a more detailed assessment reaches Berlin through naval intelligence channels. It is marked preliminary and unconfirmed, but its content is stark. At least one Japanese carrier has been severely damaged, possibly lost. American carriers remain operational. The engagement has not produced the expected outcome. The report is cautious in language, but unmistakable in implication. Something has gone wrong. Karl Dönitz reviews this information later that night in his office overlooking the city. Outside, Berlin is darkened under blackout conditions. Inside, maps and charts cover every surface. Submarine deployment schedules, convoy routes, tonnage sunk, replacement rates. Dönitz lives within these numbers. They define his war. He has long understood that Germany's submarine campaign is a race against time. Sink ships faster than they can be replaced. Force Britain into starvation and surrender before American production overwhelms German capacity. The balance is delicate. Every month matters. The Midway report disrupts that balance. If American carriers have survived and inflicted major losses on Japan, then the United States retains offensive naval power. That power will be applied somewhere. If not immediately in the Pacific, then eventually in the Atlantic. American carrier groups can escort convoys. They can hunt submarines. They can extend air coverage over previously vulnerable sea lanes. Dönitz understands carrier warfare. He knows what it means when carriers survive a major engagement. It means the enemy is not only present, but learning. It means mistakes are being corrected. It means the window for German success is closing faster than planned. He does not write a formal assessment that night. There is no point. The intelligence is incomplete. The outcome is not yet confirmed. But he makes notes in his personal log, observations meant for his own reference. The notes are brief, technical, devoid of emotion. They describe rates, ratios, and timelines. They calculate what happens if American naval strength remains intact. The conclusions are uncomfortable. If the United States can protect its convoys and expand its carrier fleet simultaneously, then the submarine war becomes unwinnable. Not immediately. Not next month, but eventually. Inevitably. Dönitz closes his log and returns to current operational orders. There is work to be done regardless of what happened at Midway. Submarines must be deployed. Targets must be identified. The campaign continues. But beneath his discipline lies a quiet recognition. The war he is fighting depends on assumptions that may no longer be valid. And if those assumptions fail, then the numbers will turn against him faster than courage or skill can compensate. By the end of June 4th, no formal conclusions are issued in Berlin. No statements are made, no adjustments are announced. The German High Command continues its routines. Briefings proceed. Orders are given. The machinery of war grinds forward with mechanical efficiency, but among senior officers, a quiet reassessment has begun. The assumption of uninterrupted Japanese success can no longer be taken for granted. The belief that American forces will remain divided and reactive is now open to question. What remains unspoken that night is the larger implication. If American carriers have survived and inflicted significant losses, then the United States is not merely present in the war. It is actively shaping it. For the first time since December 1941, German commanders are forced to consider that the global balance they relied upon may already be shifting beyond their control. They do not yet know the full extent of what happened at Midway. They do not yet understand the magnitude of Japan's losses. But they sense that something fundamental has changed. The Pacific War was supposed to be settled. It is not. And that uncertainty casts a shadow over every calculation, every timeline, every assumption about how the war will unfold. The day ends without resolution. Intelligence remains incomplete. The battle is still described as ongoing. But the silence from Japan grows louder with each passing hour. And in that silence, the first seeds of doubt take root. Not doubt about Germany's cause or Hitler's authority. Not doubt about loyalty or duty, but doubt about the war's trajectory. Doubt about the timeline. Doubt about whether the enemy they dismissed as weak and unprepared might prove far more dangerous than they imagined. That doubt will grow in the days to come. It will deepen as confirmation arrives. It will spread through the command structure as the full scale of Japan's defeat becomes undeniable. But it begins here, on June 4th, 1942, in quiet offices and private thoughts, as men trained to see patterns recognize that something has gone wrong. The war they planned is not the war they are fighting, and the enemy they underestimated may already be beyond their ability to contain. 2 days after the first fragmentary reports, a consolidated intelligence assessment arrives in Berlin. The ambiguity that characterized the initial summaries has been replaced by clarity. The Battle of Midway is over. The outcome is no longer disputed. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, have been destroyed. Hundreds of experienced pilots and deck crews are gone. The American carriers involved in the battle remain operational. The engagement is no longer described as contested or uncertain. It is identified, in precise military language, as a decisive Japanese defeat. The report is delivered through secure channels to the highest levels of German command. It is marked urgent and classified. Its contents are restricted to senior leadership and select planning staff. The document is methodical in tone, devoid of commentary or interpretation. It presents facts: ship names, tonnage lost, aircraft destroyed, personnel casualties, operational status of surviving forces. The language is technical, but the implications are unmistakable. Japan has suffered a catastrophic loss. The balance of naval power in the Pacific has shifted. The United States remains capable of offensive operations. Adolf Hitler receives the assessment during a scheduled military conference. The setting is familiar. Senior commanders seated around a long table, maps of the Eastern Front dominating the room, operational updates proceeding in orderly sequence. The Pacific briefing is delivered as a secondary item, positioned after discussions of the Eastern Theater and North Africa. But its content immediately disrupts the meeting's rhythm. The room does not fall silent, conversations do not halt, but attention sharpens, postures change. The comfortable assumptions that governed previous discussions of the Pacific War are no longer tenable. Hitler does not interrupt the briefing officer. He listens without visible reaction as the details are presented. 4 carriers sunk, elite air groups destroyed, American forces intact and victorious. When the briefing concludes, Hitler does not immediately respond. He sits in silence for several seconds, his hands resting flat on the table. Then, he speaks. His questions are not about Japan's tactical errors. He does not ask how the carriers were lost or why Japanese reconnaissance failed. Instead, he asks about American capabilities. How many carriers were involved in the battle? How many remain in the U.S. fleet? How quickly can replacements be built? How extensive are American pilot training programs? Whether this result indicates luck, coincidence, or genuine competence. The questions reveal what concerns him. For Hitler, the significance of Midway does not lie in Japan's defeat. It lies in what that defeat reveals about the United States. His worldview has long rested on specific assumptions about America. That it is industrially powerful, but strategically slow. That it is politically divided and culturally unprepared for sustained war. That its entry into the conflict would be hesitant, reactive, and ultimately insufficient to alter the outcome in Europe. Pearl Harbor had been interpreted through this lens, a devastating blow that would cripple American naval power and force the United States into a long, grinding recovery. Midway challenges all of these beliefs. The battle suggests something different. It suggests intelligence penetration. American forces knew where the Japanese fleet would be. It suggests rapid decision-making. Carriers were positioned and coordinated effectively under time pressure. It suggests operational competence. American pilots executed coordinated strikes and achieved decisive results in a narrow engagement window. These are not the traits of an unready, disorganized opponent. These are the traits of a learning enemy, one capable of correcting mistakes and adapting quickly. Wilhelm Keitel observes the shift in tone immediately. The conversation moves away from Japan's operational failure and toward American potential. This is an uncomfortable direction for everyone in the room. German strategic planning has always depended on time. Time to defeat the Soviet Union before American strength can be fully applied. Time to force Britain into exhaustion before American forces arrive in decisive numbers. Time to conclude the war in Europe before the United States can transform its industrial capacity into deployed military power. Midway implies that time is no longer neutral. It implies that the United States is moving faster than anticipated. It implies that the window for German success is narrowing. Keitel says little during the discussion. His role is administrative rather than strategic. He enforces decisions rather than shaping them. But he understands the implications. The Eastern Offensive, now just weeks away, was designed to deliver a knockout blow against the Soviet Union. If it succeeds, Germany gains control of the Caucasus oil fields and forces Stalin into collapse or negotiation. If it succeeds quickly, then American involvement becomes irrelevant. But if it drags on, if Soviet resistance proves stronger than expected, if logistics falter, if winter arrives before objectives are secured, then time shifts decisively in favor of the Allies. Midway has just demonstrated that the United States will use that time effectively. Alfred Jodl addresses the implications more directly. He notes that Japan has lost not only ships, but irreplaceable personnel. Carrier warfare depends on trained air crews and experienced deck officers. These losses cannot be restored quickly. Training pipelines require months, even years, to produce pilots capable of operating effectively from carrier decks under combat conditions. Japan's industrial base, while substantial, cannot match American production rates. The United States, by contrast, has not lost equivalent assets. Its carriers are intact. Its training programs are expanding. Its industrial system is operating at unprecedented scale. Jodl does not speculate. He presents facts. Carrier construction schedules. Aircraft production figures. Pilot training throughput. The contrast is stark and undeniable. Japan's losses at Midway represent a permanent reduction in capability. America's survival represents retained and growing strength. The balance has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed through tactical brilliance or operational daring. Modern war, Jodl understands, is decided by systems, production, training, logistics, replacement capacity. Midway has revealed which side possesses those systems in sustainable form. Hitler reacts defensively. He criticizes Japanese operational planning. He suggests that the loss reflects tactical misjudgment rather than systemic weakness. He argues that the war in Europe remains the decisive theater, and that Japan's role is to tie down American forces, not to win the war independently. He insists that Germany's focus must remain on the East, where final victory will be achieved. Yet even as he speaks, the logic he defends is under strain. Japan was not merely expected to delay American power. Japan was expected to eliminate American naval strength in the Pacific. That elimination was a foundational assumption. Without it, the entire strategic architecture of the Axis war effort is compromised. The meeting continues for another hour, but the central discussion returns repeatedly to the same uncomfortable question: what does Midway mean for the timeline? No one can answer definitively. The Eastern offensive has not yet begun. The Soviet Union's capacity to resist is still unknown. Britain remains isolated, but defiant. The full extent of American industrial mobilization is not yet visible, but the margin for error has narrowed. The assumption that Germany could fight a sequential war, first the Soviets, then Britain, with America arriving too late to matter, is no longer secure. Midway has demonstrated that America is not arriving late. It is already present, already capable, already learning. And if it is learning this quickly in the Pacific, it will learn just as quickly in Europe. Dönitz listens carefully throughout the conference. His focus is narrower than Jodl's, but no less consequential. The submarine war in the Atlantic depends entirely on attrition rates and replacement speed. Germany must sink Allied ships faster than they can be replaced. If that balance holds, Britain will be starved into submission. If that balance fails, then Germany's submarine fleet will be overwhelmed by growing numbers of escorts, aircraft, and new convoy protection technologies. Midway affects this calculation directly. If American carriers remain operational and Japanese strength is diminished, then American naval resources can be redirected. Carriers that might have been committed to the Pacific can be assigned to Atlantic escort duties. Aircraft production that might have prioritized Pacific operations can be allocated to anti-submarine warfare. The United States is not forced to choose between oceans anymore. It can contest both simultaneously. Dönitz understands what this means. Industrial war favors the side that can absorb losses without operational collapse. Midway has just demonstrated that the United States possesses that capacity. It entered the war 6 months ago. It suffered a devastating blow at Pearl Harbor. Yet at Midway, it not only fought back, but achieved a decisive victory. This is not the behavior of an opponent struggling to recover. This is the behavior of an opponent that learns, adapts, and improves under pressure. And that kind of opponent cannot be defeated through attrition alone. When the conference concludes, no orders are issued in response to Midway. There is no operational adjustment Germany can make in the Pacific. No forces to commit. No decisions to alter. The war proceeds according to existing plans. The Eastern offensive will launch as scheduled. The submarine campaign will continue. The strategic framework remains intact. But the illusion of predictability has been shattered. The war is no longer unfolding according to the sequence Germany anticipated. The enemy Hitler, dismissed as decadent, divided, and indecisive, has demonstrated clarity, coordination, and resolve. That evening, internal memoranda begin to circulate among senior planners. They do not use dramatic language. They do not predict disaster or call for major strategic revisions. But they do revise assumptions. They extend timelines. They acknowledge risks that were previously dismissed or minimized. These documents will never be read aloud in public briefings. They are meant for those who understand what has changed. They are written in the careful, technical language of military professionals who recognize that the balance of the war has shifted but cannot say so openly. One such memorandum, prepared by the operations staff and circulated to senior commanders, addresses the implications of sustained American naval capability. It notes that if U.S. carriers remain active in significant numbers, then American power projection will not be limited to defensive operations. It observes that carrier-based air power can extend operational reach far beyond traditional naval limitations. It warns that American industrial capacity, if fully mobilized, will produce carriers, aircraft, and trained personnel at rates that no Axis power can match. The memo does not conclude with recommendations. It concludes with a question: how long can Germany sustain its current operational tempo if the United States is not delayed or diminished? The question is left unanswered. There is no answer that provides reassurance. The planners know this. They leave the question hanging because its purpose is not to demand a solution, but to force acknowledgement. The war has entered a phase where favorable outcomes depend on variables Germany cannot control. Japan's performance, Soviet resilience, American speed of mobilization, British endurance. Any one of these variables, if unfavorable, threatens the entire structure. Midway has just made one of those variables definitively unfavorable. Across Berlin, in smaller offices and private quarters, similar conversations take place. Officers who have access to the Midway intelligence discuss its meaning quietly, carefully. They do not speak of defeat. That language is forbidden, both by doctrine and by self-preservation. But they speak of complications. They speak of timelines under pressure. They speak of assumptions that require reevaluation. These are not defeatist conversations. They are professional assessments conducted by men trained to see reality clearly. And the reality they see is that the war's balance has shifted in a way that cannot be ignored. Midway has not altered the battlefield in Europe. Soviet armies still stand in the east. British bombers still strike German cities. The Atlantic remains contested. But the horizon has shifted. The future that seemed manageable now appears more uncertain. The enemy that seemed distant now appears closer, more capable, more dangerous. The timeline that seemed sufficient now appears dangerously compressed. And the margin for error, already narrow, has disappeared entirely. For Hitler, the psychological impact is delayed but profound. He does not process Midway as a singular event. He processes it as a data point in a broader pattern. A pattern that contradicts his fundamental beliefs about history, destiny, and willpower. He has always believed that determination and ideological commitment can overcome material disadvantage. Midway demonstrates the opposite. It demonstrates that organization, intelligence, and production capacity can reverse initial inferiority. The United States entered the war unprepared. It suffered a devastating blow. Yet within 6 months, it has delivered a decisive victory against the most powerful naval force in the Pacific. This progression does not fit Hitler's understanding of how wars are won. He does not acknowledge this openly. He cannot. His authority depends on certainty. His regime depends on the belief that Germany's victory is inevitable, ordained by history and secured by German superiority. Any admission of doubt would undermine that structure. So he externalizes. He blames Japanese incompetence. He dismisses Midway as an anomaly. He insists that the war in Europe remains separate, distinct, and fundamentally different. But his private behavior shifts. He becomes more controlling, more intrusive in operational details, more demanding of reassurance. These are not the behaviors of a leader confident in his position. These are the behaviors of a leader sensing that control is slipping. As night falls over Berlin, The city remains darkened under blackout conditions. Inside the Reich Chancellery, lights burn late in planning offices and conference rooms. Documents are reviewed. Assessments are revised. Conversations continue in low voices. The machinery of the German war effort grinds forward with mechanical efficiency. Orders are drafted. Deployments are scheduled. The system functions as designed. But beneath that surface, something has changed. A recognition has taken hold among those who see clearly. The war they envisioned, the war of swift campaigns, decisive victories, and sequential triumphs, is not the war they are fighting. The enemy they underestimated is proving more capable than anticipated. The timeline they depended on is compressing faster than planned, and the assumptions that governed their strategy are no longer reliable. Midway has become a reference point, not because it changes German operations directly, not because it forces immediate strategic revisions, but because it exposes a truth that cannot be ignored. The United States is not a passive actor waiting to be shaped by events. It is an active participant capable of learning, adapting, and striking decisively. And if it can do that in the Pacific within 6 months of entering the war, then it will do the same in Europe when the time comes. That realization settles quietly into the consciousness of Germany's military leadership. It does not produce panic. It does not trigger immediate change. But it introduces doubt, and doubt, once introduced into a system built on certainty, spreads in ways that cannot be controlled. The generals who understand this carry the knowledge in silence. They continue to serve. They continue to obey. They continue to execute orders. But they do so with the awareness that the war's outcome is no longer assured. The margin for success has narrowed to a degree that leaves no room for miscalculation. Midway is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, unmistakably, the end of the beginning. The moment when the illusion of control gives way to the reality of uncertainty. The moment when the enemy reveals itself not as weak, but as dangerous. The moment when the future stops appearing inevitable and starts appearing precarious. And in the quiet offices of the Reich Chancellery, among men who have studied war all their lives, that realization is understood with perfect clarity. The war has changed. The question now is whether Germany can adapt quickly enough to survive it. June 1942 moves into July, and the initial shock of Midway settles into something more permanent, a recalibration of expectations that spreads quietly through German military planning offices. The Battle of Midway is no longer discussed as a current event. It has become historical fact, absorbed into the baseline from which all future assessments must proceed. The questions now are not about what happened, but about what it means going forward. And the answers, when examined honestly, offer no comfort. In the Naval High Command building overlooking the Tirpitz-Ufer, analysts compile reports on American industrial capacity. These documents are dense with figures, charts, and projections. They track steel production, shipyard capacity, aircraft manufacturing output, and workforce allocation. The numbers are gathered from multiple sources: intelligence intercepts, neutral country trade data, pre-war industrial surveys, and statistical modeling. The analysis is methodical, conservative, and devastating in its conclusions. The United States is not merely recovering from Pearl Harbor. It is expanding at a rate that exceeds all previous estimates. Shipyards that were building merchant vessels in 1941 have been converted to military production. New yards have been constructed. Existing facilities have been enlarged. The scale is unprecedented. American shipbuilding capacity in 1942 is projected to exceed the combined output of Germany, Italy, and Japan. By 1943, the gap will widen further. By 1944, American production will dwarf Axis capabilities entirely. Karl Dönitz receives these reports with grim recognition. He has always understood that the submarine war is a race against industrial capacity. His strategy depends on a simple calculation: sink Allied ships faster than they can be replaced, force Britain into starvation, and collapse before American production reaches full scale. For 18 months, that strategy appeared viable. Submarine wolf packs operated with devastating effectiveness. Convoy losses mounted. British food supplies dwindled. The balance seemed to favor Germany. Midway changes the equation. Not directly. No submarines were lost at Midway. No Atlantic convoys were affected. But systemically, the survival of American carrier strength means that naval aviation remains a priority for U.S. production. Carriers under construction will be completed and deployed. Aircraft manufacturing will accelerate. Pilot training programs will expand. Most importantly, the United States has demonstrated that it can absorb major operational setbacks and still deliver decisive victories within months. That resilience is the signature of an industrial power operating at the peak of its capability. Dönitz reviews the production figures alongside his operational reports. German submarines are sinking Allied tonnage at record rates, but replacement tonnage is arriving faster. American shipyards are launching Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels, at intervals measured in weeks. The ships are crude, inelegant, and effective. They carry supplies, troops, and equipment across the Atlantic in growing numbers. Escort vessels multiply. Destroyer production accelerates. Anti-submarine technologies improve. Air coverage expands as escort carriers enter service. The submarine fleet is fighting harder and achieving less. Loss rates climb steadily. Experienced commanders are killed or captured. Replacement crews lack the training and skill of their predecessors. The technological advantage that German submarines once enjoyed erodes as Allied sonar, radar, and depth charge systems advance. Dönitz understands the trajectory. He has always understood it. The only question was whether Germany could achieve victory before the numbers turned decisively against him. Midway suggests that the window has already closed. In private conversations with senior staff, Dönitz speaks with brutal honesty. He does not use ideological language or make appeals to destiny. He describes ratios, replacement rates, and attrition curves. He explains that submarine warfare can delay Allied buildup, but cannot prevent it. He acknowledges that American industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, will overwhelm German countermeasures. He does not predict immediate collapse, but he makes clear that time is no longer Germany's ally. Every month that passes strengthens the enemy and weakens Germany's relative position. These assessments are not welcomed. They contradict the official narrative of inevitable German victory. They suggest limits to what willpower and determination can achieve. They imply that industrial capacity, not ideological commitment, will determine the war's outcome. Such conclusions are dangerous to voice openly. Dönitz is careful. He frames his analysis in technical terms, avoids defeatist language, and directs his warnings only to those with clearance and authority. But the message is unmistakable. The war Germany is fighting cannot be won through the methods currently employed. Alfred Jodl reaches similar conclusions through different analysis. His focus is broader, encompassing land, air, and sea operations across multiple theaters. He reviews intelligence on American military expansion with the same systematic rigor he applies to all strategic problems. The figures are staggering. American military personnel numbers are projected to reach millions within 2 years. Training facilities are expanding exponentially. Equipment production is accelerating across every category: tanks, aircraft, artillery, vehicles, small arms. The United States is transforming from a peacetime economy into a war machine operating at total mobilization. Jodl understands what this means for Germany's strategic position. The war in the East must be concluded before American strength can be fully applied in Europe. The summer offensive toward the Caucasus must succeed decisively. Soviet resistance must collapse. Oil fields must be secured. The Eastern Front must be stabilized at a defensible line that allows Germany to redirect forces westward. All of this must happen quickly, within months, not years, because every delay allows American power to grow. Midway has demonstrated that the United States is not delaying, it is accelerating. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, American forces delivered a decisive naval victory. This is not the timeline of a nation struggling to mobilize. This is the timeline of a nation that has already mobilized and is now deploying that strength operationally. If the Pacific War follows this trajectory, then the European theater will follow the same pattern. American forces will arrive in Britain. They will train, organize, and prepare. And when they strike, they will do so with overwhelming material superiority. Jodl drafts a memorandum for the operations staff. It is carefully worded, technically precise, and deeply pessimistic in substance. He outlines the implications of sustained American industrial output. He describes the cumulative effect of replacement capacity exceeding loss rates. He notes that modern war is decided by logistics, production, and systemic endurance rather than tactical brilliance. He does not recommend surrender or withdrawal. He recommends acceleration, faster operations, greater risk acceptance, more aggressive pursuit of decisive outcomes before the window closes entirely. The memorandum circulates among senior planners. It is read, discussed, and filed. No formal response is issued. No strategic adjustments are ordered. The Eastern Offensive proceeds as planned. The submarine campaign continues. The war machinery grinds forward. But among those who read Jodl's assessment, the message registers. The margin for success is narrower than previously believed. The timeline is more compressed. The enemy is more capable. And the industrial imbalance is widening in a direction that cannot be reversed. Wilhelm Keitel receives Jodl's memorandum and reads it twice. He does not disagree with the analysis. He cannot. The numbers are undeniable, but Keitel's role is not to question strategy or propose alternatives. His role is to enforce Hitler's decisions and maintain the command structure. Doubt, even when justified, is operationally useless if it undermines discipline and cohesion. Keitel files the memorandum without comment. He continues his administrative duties. He ensures that orders are transmitted, logistics are coordinated, and the system functions smoothly. He does not allow his private concerns to interfere with his public responsibilities. Yet even Keitel understands that the war's character has changed. The assumptions that governed German planning in 1940 and 1941 no longer apply. The belief that Germany could fight a limited war, achieve decisive victories, and force negotiated settlements is obsolete. The war has become total, global, and industrial. It will be decided not by the brilliance of individual commanders or the courage of individual soldiers, but by the accumulated weight of production, logistics, and replacement capacity. And in that kind of war, Germany is at a fundamental disadvantage. Hitler himself resists these conclusions with increasing desperation. He continues to speak of victory as inevitable, ordained by history and guaranteed by German superiority. He dismisses unfavorable intelligence as defeatist or exaggerated. He attributes setbacks to incompetence, betrayal, or bad luck rather than systemic imbalance. His rhetoric grows more extreme, more absolute, more divorced from operational reality. He demands miracles from his commanders, impossible offensives, unsustainable defense lines, victories achieved through sheer willpower. In private meetings with senior officers, Hitler's behavior becomes more erratic. He interrupts briefings, rejects assessments that contradict his beliefs, and insists on micromanaging operational details far beyond his expertise. He demands production increases that cannot be achieved. He orders offensives without adequate logistics. He refuses to authorize withdrawals even when positions become untenable. This is not the behavior of a leader confident in his strategy. This is the behavior of a leader who senses that events are moving beyond his control and responds by tightening his grip even as his authority erodes. The generals who serve him understand this. They see the contradiction between public rhetoric and private reality. They recognize that Hitler's certainty is performative, a psychological defense against the implications of Midway, Stalingrad, and the growing industrial might of the Allies. But they cannot challenge him openly. The structure of the Nazi regime does not permit dissent. Loyalty is enforced through fear, ideology, and the machinery of totalitarian control. To question Hitler's judgment is to risk removal, imprisonment, or worse. So they continue. They salute, obey, and execute orders. They manage the war with professional competence, even as they understand that the outcome is slipping beyond reach. They maintain discipline within their commands. They preserve the illusion of control for as long as possible, and they carry the knowledge privately, in conversations that will never be recorded, in thoughts that will never be voiced publicly, that the war they are fighting cannot be won through the means available to them. By autumn of 1942, the implications of Midway have permeated every level of German strategic thinking. The battle itself is no longer frequently mentioned. It has become an understood reference point, a moment that divided the war into before and after. The assumptions of the before period, that Japan would dominate the Pacific indefinitely, that American naval power would remain crippled for years, that the United States would arrive in Europe too late to matter, are gone. The after period operates under different conditions. American strength is growing. Allied coordination is improving. The Axis initiative is stalling. In North Africa, German forces under Rommel face increasing pressure. British resistance stiffens. Supply lines strain under Allied air and naval interdiction. Rommel requests reinforcements, additional tanks, more fuel. The requests are denied or only partially fulfilled. Germany's resources are committed to the Eastern Front, where the summer offensive has stalled outside Stalingrad. The city that bears Stalin's name has become a symbolic and strategic deadlock. German forces advance block by block, building by building, at horrific cost. Soviet resistance does not break. The offensive that was supposed to deliver decisive victory has become a grinding attrition battle with no clear end. Alfred Jodl reviews the situation with cold clarity. The Eastern offensive has failed to achieve its objectives within the required timeline. The Caucasus oil fields remain beyond reach. Soviet forces continue to resist despite catastrophic losses. Winter is approaching. German logistics are overstretched. The strategic position that was supposed to improve has instead deteriorated. And all of this is happening while American industrial output continues to climb, while Allied forces prepare for eventual offensives in Europe, while the window for German success closes day by day. Jodl's operational assessments grow increasingly blunt. He describes the Eastern Front as a strategic liability that consumes resources without delivering decisive results. He warns that Germany is fighting a multi-front war without the industrial base to sustain it. He notes that Allied bombing campaigns are degrading German production capacity, disrupting transportation networks, and forcing the diversion of resources to homeland defense. He observes that the submarine war in the Atlantic is losing effectiveness as convoy protection improves. He does not predict immediate collapse, but he makes clear that Germany's strategic position is deteriorating in every measurable dimension. These assessments are presented in closed-door meetings with senior commanders. They are documented in classified memoranda that circulate only among those with highest-level clearance. They are discussed in language that is technical, precise, and carefully sanitized of any hint of defeatism. But the substance is unmistakable. Germany is losing the war of attrition. The industrial balance favors the Allies decisively. Time is working against Germany in every theater. The only remaining questions are how long the system can hold and how much damage will be inflicted before collapse becomes inevitable. Karl Dönitz watches his submarine fleet diminish month by month. Loss rates exceed replacement rates. Experienced commanders are killed faster than new ones can be trained. Allied anti-submarine capabilities improve continuously. Escort carriers provide air cover over previously vulnerable sea lanes. Long-range aircraft close the mid-Atlantic gap where submarines once operated with impunity. New sonar systems detect submerged vessels more effectively. Depth charge patterns become more lethal. The technological edge Germany once enjoyed has evaporated. Dönitz continues to press his campaign with grim determination. He understands that submarine warfare is Germany's only means of directly threatening Allied logistics. If the Atlantic can be made too dangerous for convoys, then American buildup in Britain will be delayed, possibly prevented. But the numbers tell a different story. Allied tonnage sunk per submarine deployed is declining. Submarine losses per convoy engagement are rising. The cost-benefit ratio is moving inexorably against Germany. The campaign that once seemed capable of forcing British surrender is now merely slowing American buildup, not stopping it. In private correspondence with naval staff, Dönitz acknowledges the reality. He describes the submarine war as a delaying action, not a winning strategy. He notes that American shipbuilding capacity has reached levels that make attrition warfare unsustainable for Germany. He observes that the survival of American carrier strength, the carriers that won at Midway, means that escort capabilities will continue to improve. He does not advocate abandoning the campaign. There is no alternative. But he makes clear that expectations must be adjusted. The submarine fleet can harass, disrupt, and delay. It cannot prevent Allied victory. Wilhelm Keitel's position becomes increasingly untenable. He is caught between Hitler's demands for impossible results and the operational reality reported by field commanders. He transmits orders for offensives that cannot succeed. He enforces directives that contradict strategic logic. He maintains the appearance of confidence while privately understanding that the system is failing. His authority depends on loyalty to Hitler. His credibility depends on aligning orders with operational possibility. These two requirements are no longer compatible. Keitel responds by retreating into formalism. He focuses on administrative precision, procedural correctness, and the mechanical transmission of orders. He avoids substantive strategic discussions. He defers to Hitler in all decisions. He becomes, in effect, a transmitter rather than a commander, a conduit through which directives flow without examination or challenge. This behavior is not cowardice, it is survival. The Nazi regime does not tolerate dissent. Keitel's continued presence in his position depends on absolute obedience, so he obeys, enforces, and maintains the structure even as it fractures beneath the weight of contradiction. Among the broader officer corps, awareness of Germany's strategic position spreads unevenly. Senior commanders with access to comprehensive intelligence understand the trajectory clearly. They see the production figures, the replacement rates, the Allied buildup. They recognize that the war's outcome is determined by industrial capacity and that Germany cannot compete on those terms. But this knowledge does not translate into action. The command structure is rigid, hierarchical, and ideologically enforced. Questioning strategic direction is not merely discouraged, it is dangerous. Lower-ranking officers and frontline commanders operate with partial information. They understand that the war is difficult, that losses are mounting, that objectives are not being achieved. But they do not see the complete picture. They continue to fight with discipline and skill because that is what their training and duty require. They trust that higher command possesses information and plans that will lead to eventual victory. That trust is misplaced, but it is necessary for maintaining cohesion and morale. The contradiction between public narrative and private understanding grows wider. Official communications speak of temporary setbacks, strategic adjustments, and ultimate triumph. Internal assessments describe deteriorating positions, unsustainable attrition rates, and narrowing options. The gap between these two realities creates a psychological burden that senior officers carry in silence. They know what cannot be said, they understand what cannot be acknowledged, and they continue to serve a system that is failing while maintaining the appearance of confidence. Hitler's response to this divergence is to double down on ideological rhetoric. He speaks more frequently of destiny, willpower, and historical necessity. He attributes setbacks to insufficient belief rather than insufficient resources. He demands greater sacrifices, more extreme measures, absolute commitment. His speeches grow longer, more repetitive, more divorced from operational facts. He surrounds himself with loyalists who reinforce his worldview and isolates himself from those who might challenge it. In the Reich Chancellery, late-night meetings become more common. Hitler presides over briefings that stretch for hours, dominated by his monologues rather than structured reports. He interrupts commanders, dismisses warnings, and insists on strategies that contradict professional military judgment. The meetings are exhausting, unproductive, and increasingly surreal. Officers leave these sessions with orders that cannot be executed and directives that ignore reality. They return to their posts and attempt to implement the possible while managing the impossible. By the end of 1942, the psychological weight of Midway has fully settled into German strategic consciousness. The battle itself is rarely mentioned, but its implications govern every assessment, every timeline, every projection. It stands as proof that the United States is not a passive, reactive opponent. It is an active, learning, industrially dominant force that will grow stronger over time. Japan's defeat in the Pacific foreshadows what will happen in Europe when American power is fully applied. The German generals who understand this most clearly carry a particular burden. They are professional soldiers, trained to see war as it is rather than as they wish it to be. They recognize patterns, calculate ratios, project outcomes based on measurable data. And every analysis they conduct leads to the same conclusion: Germany cannot win a war of industrial attrition against the combined strength of the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The only pathway to German survival was rapid, decisive victory before Allied strength could be fully mobilized. Midway marked the moment when that pathway closed. They cannot say this openly. They cannot advocate for negotiated settlement or strategic withdrawal. The regime they serve does not permit such options. So they continue. They execute orders. They manage operations. They maintain discipline. They preserve the structure for as long as possible. And they wait for the inevitable outcome, knowing it will arrive, but unable to prevent it. This is the true significance of Midway for German leadership. Not that it caused immediate operational disaster, not that it forced strategic revision, but that it revealed the war's ultimate trajectory with perfect clarity. It demonstrated that the enemy possessed the capacity, resilience, and industrial strength to recover from devastating losses and strike back decisively. It proved that American power was not theoretical or distant, but present and growing. It confirmed that time, the one resource Germany depended upon most, was now working decisively against them. And in the quiet offices where strategic assessments were drafted, where production figures were compiled, where operational reports were analyzed, this understanding settled like a weight that could not be lifted. The war was lost. Not immediately, not irreversibly in every operational sense, but structurally, systemically, inevitably. The numbers did not lie, the trajectory was clear, and no amount of courage, skill, or ideological commitment could change the fundamental reality that industrial capacity would decide the outcome, and Germany did not possess it. The war continues into 1943, 1944, and into the spring of 1945. German forces fight with discipline and determination across shrinking fronts. The Eastern armies retreat through Soviet territory, contesting every mile. The Atlantic Wall is constructed and then breached on D-Day. Allied bombing reduces German cities to rubble. Production facilities are destroyed. Transportation networks collapse. Fuel supplies evaporate. The machinery of the German war effort grinds toward paralysis under the accumulated weight of Allied industrial and military power. Throughout this decline, the generals who understood the trajectory early remain in their positions or are replaced by others equally aware of the inevitable outcome. They continue to issue orders, coordinate operations, and manage the war effort with professional competence. They do so not because they believe victory is achievable, but because the system demands it, because duty requires it, because there is no alternative that preserves their honor or safety. Karl Dönitz assumes leadership of Germany following Hitler's suicide in April 1945. He negotiates surrender not because he believes Germany is defeated militarily, though it objectively is, but because continuing the war serves no purpose except additional destruction. The submarine campaign he commanded for years is defunct. The fleet is scattered, sunk, or surrendered. The industrial war he warned about in 1942 has concluded exactly as he predicted. American production overwhelmed German capacity. Allied strength accumulated beyond Germany's ability to resist. The outcome he foresaw after Midway has arrived. Alfred Jodl signs the instrument of surrender on behalf of the German armed forces. His role in the final days is administrative, mechanical, devoid of illusion. He understands precisely what has occurred. The war Germany initiated in 1939 with confidence and ambition has concluded in total defeat. The industrial imbalance he identified in 1942 determined the outcome. The timeline he warned was insufficient proved even shorter than he feared. The enemy he recognized as capable and learning proved exactly that. The realization that came after Midway has been validated by history. Wilhelm Keitel is present at the surrender. He maintains his formal composure, his administrative precision, his rigid adherence to protocol. He has served the Nazi regime faithfully throughout the war, enforcing orders without question, maintaining structure without dissent. He will be tried at Nuremberg, convicted of war crimes, and executed. His loyalty to Hitler and his complicity in atrocities will define his legacy. But in the final hours of the war, as the documents are signed and the Reich formally ceases to exist, he understands that the trajectory was clear years earlier. Midway was not the cause of German defeat, but it was the moment when defeat became mathematically certain. The war crimes trials that follow in Nuremberg expose the full scope of Nazi atrocities, the Holocaust, the mass killings, the systematic brutality, all of it documented, presented, and judged. The moral bankruptcy of the regime is laid bare. The generals who served it are held accountable. Some are executed. Others are imprisoned. A few escape judgment through suicide or flight. The historical verdict is unambiguous. The Nazi regime was not merely strategically incompetent, it was morally monstrous. Yet within that larger condemnation lies a narrower historical question. When did Germany's military leadership understand that the war could not be won? The answer, documented in internal memoranda, personal diaries, and post-war testimony, points consistently to 1942, to the moment when American industrial power revealed itself not as potential, but as deployed reality, to the moment when Japan's invincibility was shattered, to the moment when the assumption of Axis dominance gave way to the recognition of Allied inevitability. Midway was that moment. Not because it involved German forces directly, not because it altered European operations immediately, but because it demonstrated with perfect clarity that the United States possessed the capacity to absorb losses, learn from defeats, and strike back decisively within months. It revealed that American power was not delayed or hesitant, but active and growing. It confirmed that the industrial imbalance would determine outcomes regardless of tactical brilliance or operational skill. And it established a timeline that Germany could not meet. The generals who saw this clearly in 1942 carried that knowledge for the remainder of the war. They continued to serve, to plan, to execute orders. They maintained discipline and structure. They fought professionally even as they understood the outcome. This was not heroism. It was not wisdom. It was the behavior of men trapped within a system they could not escape, serving a regime they could not challenge, bound by oaths they would not break. The historical lesson is not that Germany's generals were prescient or admirable. Many were complicit in atrocities. Many enforced policies of extermination and brutality. Their professional competence does not absolve their moral culpability, but the historical record does reveal that they understood the strategic trajectory far earlier than commonly believed. They recognized that industrial war favors industrial powers. They calculated that American production would overwhelm Axis capacity. They projected that time worked against Germany. They were correct. Midway stands in that historical record as a turning point, not because it changed German strategy, it did not, but because it confirmed what careful analysis already suggested. The war had entered a phase where outcomes would be determined by cumulative capacity rather than singular brilliance. The United States had demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and industrial strength in decisive form. The Axis alliance had revealed limitations that could not be overcome through willpower or ideology. For students of military history, Midway offers a lesson in the nature of modern war. Industrial capacity, logistical sustainability, and replacement rates determine outcomes more reliably than tactical genius or operational daring. The side that can absorb losses and continue fighting will outlast the side that cannot, regardless of initial advantages. The United States in 1942 demonstrated this principle decisively. Germany's generals recognized it, but recognition without the ability to respond is merely knowledge of inevitability. The final silence that settles over this history is the silence of men who understood but could not act, who saw the trajectory but could not alter it, who recognized the outcome but continued toward it nonetheless. That silence is preserved in documents that were never meant for public view, in conversations that were never recorded, in private thoughts that were carried to the grave. It is the silence of professional soldiers serving a criminal regime, maintaining discipline while understanding defeat, executing orders while foreseeing collapse. Midway did not speak loudly. It did not announce the war's end. But for those trained to read patterns and calculate outcomes, it spoke with unmistakable clarity. The war was no longer a question of will or courage. It was a question of numbers, and the numbers, from that moment forward, favored only one conclusion. The generals knew. They continued. And in their continuation lies the final grim truth of the Second World War, that knowledge without power is merely the ability to foresee disaster without the means to prevent it. The carriers that survived Midway went on to fight across the Pacific. American industrial power, validated and unleashed, produced fleets, armies, and air forces that overwhelmed Axis resistance on every front. The timeline compressed. The outcome arrived. And the generals who understood what Midway meant in June of 1942 were proven correct in their darkest assessments. The war was decided not by belief or destiny, but by the accumulated weight of production, logistics, and industrial endurance. And in that kind of war, Germany never had a chance.